Everybody's got a right to live. Everybody.
We're not in a day where we need a moment. We're in a day where we have to build a movement that intersects and brings us all together. We don't know yet what would happen if we had in 30 to 40 states a moral poor people's campaign with people in state capitals over an extended period of time. But I think we ought to find out.
Because everybody's got a right to live. Okay, so as we know, every movement has had its sound. Each movement that we think about up until the Black Lives Matter movement has its own distinct sound. And we like to say that music is the personality of the movement. It's what a lot of people hear about the movement before they even hear what the actual issues are. And for a lot of people, music draws them to the movement. So we all know, how many people by show of hands understand or know what Resurrection City was during the Poor People's Campaign? So it was in May of 1968, exactly, May 1968, that Resurrection City was set up just south of the Reflection Pool. And this town was made of canvas and cardboard, and it was a shanty town. And it was set up for long-term protests. They set that town up, and it was built in the rain, it was maintained in the rain, and for the first 19 days, it poured rain, and the foundation became muddy. And the children went out and started playing in the mud. And there was one protester who was recorded as having said, "It's okay, because poor people are used to living like this." It was nothing new for them. And the children gave them hope, because even through the rain and the mud, they saw the kids out there playing. And they knew that they were fighting for the children and for their families. So every evening there would be song fests, and the song fests were led by Reverend Frederick Douglass Kirkpatrick from Louisiana and Jimmy Collier from Chicago. And they would bring people together, and they would lead songs and teach songs. And in a movement, songs happen sometime extemporaneously. And the reason that that happens that way is because things happen in the moment in movements, and you have to be ready to shift the lyrics according to what's going on. So for instance, with us in the moral movement, we're outside, and even chants happen that way. And we were outside and it started raining. And people were being arrested, and we're outside supporting until it was our turn, or even after our turn had come and gone. And it started pouring rain, and the legislators came out and thought surely we were gonna leave, and we started chanting, "Rain or shine, got justice on my mind." We came out another night, and they decided that the light that we stood under, they would turn it off. So we were in the dark, and we started singing, "Day or night, gonna stand for what is right." We were out there chanting in the dark. And as people were being arrested, they found that they didn't have enough buses for us, so we started singing, "You gonna need another bus, 'cause baby, there are more of us." And surely each time there were more. I was in a class of 49 people arrested, so we call ourselves class of 49. But every Monday after that, the numbers grew and grew and grew, and so the chants and the songs changed. So back to Resurrection City, during these song fests, there was one song that was created, and I've heard of different songs, but this one I just heard, and it kind of stuck with me, and I've been singing it. So if your mouths are not full, and you catch on to the chorus, you'll find it's kind of catchy. It's gonna stay with you. And so the song says, "Everybody's got a right to live." And that hit me right off the bat, because it didn't say everybody's got a right to survive. We've survived a lot. People survived the Trail of Tears. They survived the Holocaust. People survived the Middle Passage, slavery, Jim Crow, the Great Depression. People survived. But what is living versus surviving? And so I want to say before we do this song too, if we're talking about resurrecting the Poor People's Campaign, what happens with the arts? What happens with musicians? We have an obligation to resurrect the lament of poor people. We have that obligation because if we forget the music and the lament of the people, we forget the people. And we deny our own current situation. So we have to link with the songs that were lifted then and create new songs now for this movement. So anyway, this song goes, everybody's got a right to live. Everybody's got a right to live. And before this campaign failed, we'll all go down in jail because everybody's got a right to live. Want to try that? Everybody's got a right to live. Everybody's got a right to live. And before this campaign fails, we'll all go down in jail because everybody's got a right to live. And the verses were kind of simple. Black man picked the cotton long time ago. He has been the victim since they brought him to the shore. Black man dug the ditches, hewed down the pine, gave his soul to Jesus, kept on towing the line because everybody's got a right to live. Everybody's got a right to live. And before this campaign fails, we'll all go down in jail because everybody's got a right to live.
Everybody's got a right. So that song will be relifted and we'll be learning it across the nation, right? And before this campaign fails, we'll all go down in jail because everybody has a right to live. Now, today, what you're seeing here in the nation's capital is a teach-in. Now, I'm going to say something that's going to offend some of y'all at the nation's capital, but you'll love me afterwards. But the worst thing this could do would be to stay in the nation's capital, because the real movement is a ground movement from the bottom up. States that will have an impact. You have to have in the capital, but also from the state. So what we're doing today is a teaching. And this is live streamed across the nation. The relationship, and there's not any one organization, the relationship with Repairs and the new Poor People's Campaign and Healing of the Nation and the other groups that have come together, faith and otherwise, have grown out of us working together for now over a year with the moral revival. Their work has been for 10 years, but there comes a time we have to intersect, right? And Dr. Harris, who's one of the leaders with Kairos, we did 22 states across the United States. Had more than 25,000 people to attend, and it was very diverse, because our first focus is intersectionality. And that here's the premise that we work from. You can't separate race and class. You can't have a conversation separate from race and poverty. And that doesn't work, and it has to have deep moral underpinnings. And not just in terms of what does it look like in terms of skin color, but you have to have intersectional, I say this word, fusion. Because in the moral movement, we don't believe in populism. Fusion coalition that grows out of the first Reconstruction, when blacks and whites came together in the South in 1800s and then later in the 1960s and transformed. And the difference between fusion is that fusion understands that your issue is our issue, which may mean, for instance, and Tanya, where's Bishop Rawls, will tell you what lessons we learned from Moral Monday. One you learned this morning. You see how we didn't have any one person at the podium? Did y'all see that? That's a rule. That's like a part of it. The second is that there'll be times, for instance, that my brother here might come to the podium and talk about black poverty. And I might come to the podium and talk about white poverty. Because in a fusion movement, you want to let people who may be your adversaries understand they're not going to be separating us. Because we understand the game. And we understand the game of the Southern strategy that's also used in the Rust Belt and in the Northern. It is to divide and conquer. It is to use code words and dog whistles to separate black and brown people and white people. So we've had some people say, well, I don't necessarily want to do this. And that's fine. We don't fuss at anybody. But we say, well, about that. But we say, but somebody has to do the moral intersectional piece. Somebody has to do that piece in this work. So as we bring together, we're diverse, we're black, we're white, we're gay, we're straight, we're young, we're old, we're Republican, we're Democrat, because we found in a moral movement, for instance, we're now organizing in Mitchell County, North Carolina, that's 99% white, 89% Republican. And I can go to Mitchell County anytime right now, and that's not bragging, and the movement there can produce 400 people anytime on a 3-day notice. And we're not going up there backing off race. In fact, if anything, we're going there and we're showing people that the same people, for instance, that vote against voting rights and voter suppression, that are telling, and they're doing it to suppress the black folk, are also suppressing the policies that relate to the poor. We were able to show people, okay, you voted for this person because you said they're white evangelical, and they told you they were going to be for prayer in the school and whatnot, but did you also know that that person you elected voted against health care, Medicaid expansion? And then somebody might say, well, that primarily goes to brown and poor people and brown people, black people. You say, no. Actually, in our state, of the 500,000 folk that would receive Medicaid expansion, 346,000 of them are white. And 1,000 of them are in this county, and they can't be black. Because ain't no black people up here. Because all the black people will run out. So then the power of that is to then get somebody from Mitchell County to come to a rally and speak on how the policies that their person is engaged in are hurting black people. And then one of us that may be black speak, because what it does is it throws your adversary into a quandary. Because they have so been used to us getting in our silos. And part of what we found in this moral fusion movement is the power of getting outside. That's why, for instance, people say Dr. King started talking about economics in '67. They don't know history. Dr. King's sermon in 1958 in Montgomery, Paul's letter to American Christians, he talked about the 99% being ruled over by the 1%. This is 10 years before '68. But what he understood is he once said in '61 he said to the union movement, there's only one coalition that can transform black, whites, labor, poor whites, Latinos, natives, all coming together around an agenda that takes the issue of race and class serious. So in this movement, somebody said, is it race or class? Our answer is, it is. It is. I think that's one of the great dangers right now of the so-called Democrats who want to say, let's find an issue that unites us together beyond race. Let's go, let's cut across race. No, you got to cut into it. You got to get in there, and I think the press conference said something about this. So I like to say that the movement is diverse. In the Moral Monday movement, for instance, in North Carolina, many of you may not know this, 11% of the 1,200 people that got arrested were Republican. 60-some% were white. Am I right, Tanya? Now, how do we know that? Because one of our adversaries decided to play a game, and they created a computer game that could identify arrestees, because they wanted to prove that it was just a bunch of quote-unquote leftists. Now, the other thing that we're pushing for in this movement is we change the thesaurus. We need to stop saying left and right. Who told you to call people right that you think are wrong? Think about the linguistic problem with that. Who told you to call somebody conservative? Every one of y'all in here conservative. See, y'all wouldn't clap. Watch this. Watch this. Let me show you. How many of y'all want to conserve justice? How many of you want to conserve love? How many of you want to conserve equal protection under the law? Now watch this. How many of you want to liberally spread justice? See, you cannot use the language of the empire if you're going to challenge the empire. So, for instance, you know, so I go back. So they created this computer thing, and being funny, and it was like the program down in Mississippi in the '60s. The Sovereign Commission would put all the names of black people, you know, to scare them away, and to basically suggest to them, if you stood up, we're gonna put your name, we're gonna out you, we're gonna out you. So one of our young people played the game. It's a group called Civitas. And they came and said, Reverend Barber, guess what? We can track all of our arrestees with their game. I said, you mean what they meant for evil can be used for good? They said, uh-huh. I said, okay, then do it. So they went on and started playing the game and came up with stats. Found out that there were Republicans that got arrested. They said the only folk that were in the movement were the lefties from Chapel Hill, Raleigh, Durham. Found out, no, they were from all over the state. They said they were just a bunch of outside agitators. Found out that wasn't true. The point is, at the end, in fact, we ended up thanking them for their gift. but that's, and I'm glad you, so that is why even look at the room today, and that's sister's question. So I want y'all to look around and how the invite, look at this room. Because this is the room that those who have been using the Southern strategy for 50 years are scared of. If you want to, and part of what ought to encourage us, and I preached a sermon, I'm through, entitled, I just had to get this out. It was titled Redemption, Resiliency, and Revival After Rejection. Because a lot of folk have been dejected and rejected. But there's a point, Walter Wink once said this, that you have to learn how to get hope from your enemy's attack. And the way you get hope for your enemy's attack is you look at how much respect the enemy has for you based on how much they come against you with. And if your enemy's got to go all the way to Russia, huh? If your enemy has to find, and I mean enemy in the sense of policy, if your adversary has to try to figure a way to get $1 billion of free publicity and to con the press, if your enemy has to come up with code words, if your enemy has to run a birther campaign for years, if your enemy has to repeal the things that are health care because they're afraid if people ever get comfortable with it, they're going to understand the connection between their political life and their life. Yes. If your enemy has to spend billions of dollars and lie and do all those things, that may not be a sign that you are weak. And the question becomes, when you're facing a giant, it's not how you see the giant, my Jewish friends, it's how you see yourself. Do you see yourself as a grasshopper? So, for instance, people keep saying, oh my God, you know, why this poor people's campaign has got to go, and moral campaign is going through the South. These are my opening comments, but why are we going to be organizing in cities across the South and the Rust Belt? Why? Okay, some people say, well, you know, in this past election, you know, it was 3 states. Michigan, no, it wasn't. It was more than 3 states. It was the southern states. And how a lot of so-called progressives write off the South, which is the foundational home for poverty. Okay? Black and white, all right? Write it off the South. And then we say, well, it came down to Michigan, Pennsylvania. That's still problematic. Why? Because where did the movements that have changed this country come up out of? The South. Secondly, if you write off the South, if you write off the very place that poor black and white people, Latinos, need to come together, And then you write off the Rust Belt, and you write off what's going on in many of our northern cities. But let me talk about the South for a minute. In just 13 states in the South, you have 171 electoral votes, from North Carolina to Texas. If you can control 13 states, you can control 171, which means you only need 99 electoral votes from the other 37 states to win. If you can control those 13 states, you control 26 senators, which means you only need 25 from the other 37. If you control those 13, you control 31% of the United States Congress, which means you only need 20% from the other 37. You control 13 state houses that control election boards, that controls whether we vote on a living wage, that controls money for public education, that controls gerrymandering, and 13 governors who have the majority on the seats of those election boards. That's one way of looking at it. But the flip side of that is, if you now, the demographics are such that if you register 30% of the African Americans in those same states and bring them together with poor whites and progressive whites and Latinos, then you can fundamentally shift those states. Now, if you shift those states, if you shift just 4 of those states, if you build a movement that brings people together, you have fundamentally shifted the dynamics. The dynamics. And so that's why we have to have a moral movement that gives people a whole new moral imagination, that finds a way to intersect race and poverty, pull us together, and it cannot, and it's not a one rally, one moment. That's why these teach-ins that these folk been planning for 10 years, we've been working together, but now what we're doing here will move around the country, because as the scriptures say, before you build a tower, you must consider the cost. And part of that is, when we talk about transformation, we have to get out of the mindset of progressives of talking about one rally, one text, one letter. I had somebody the other day when it was wrote me a writer and said that they had talked to some progressives, and they said, well, now it's time for us to go from confrontation, not nonviolent action. And I said, really? They said, yeah. They said, what do you think about that? I said, well, how long has that person tried nonviolent? And most of the time they come back, well, we did a rally. I said, but wait a minute now. Today would be the 30th day of the Montgomery bus boycott. We don't know yet what would happen if we had in 30 to 40 states a moral poor people's campaign with people in state capitals over an extended period of time. But I think we ought to find out. We don't know what the current extremists would have to do if we have deep, strong economists and all build us the right kind of agenda and platform, and then you had people in the nation's capital seriously over a period of time. But I think we ought to find out, because we're not in a day where we need a moment. We're in a day where you ask that right question, where we have to build a movement that intersects and brings us all together. My little daughter calls it interlocking. Now this is my last thing. Grab your neighbor and hook up. Not with your hand. Put it. Make sure they can't get away. Everybody. This is my presentation. Now, I'm not doing anything else the rest of the day. The rest of I hope Dr. Forbes will tell y'all this story. I think it's in Ezekiel about those 2 sticks. Is it Ezekiel? I hope Dr. Forbes will tell you this story about there was a tough time in Ezekiel, and the 2 came together. Or maybe he'll tell you, because he's better at this, to tell you about this time the folk were so depressed and broken and bad leadership, and they were all down in this valley, and they were all just destitute and despair. And God comes to a prophet and asks him, can the bones live? And he said, I don't know, which is the right question. I don't know. I don't know. And God said, well, I know, but I need you to do something. Well, what do you need me to do? Do you need me to figure out every step? Do you need me to have all the answers and all the money is up front? Because we can't do anything unless we got all the money up front. What do you need? He said, I need you to be willing and daring enough to start speaking, just start speaking and giving a new vision in the valley. Well, why, God? Because bones, even when they're dry and dusty, still have ears. And they still have a soul. And if you start speaking to the bones, then the bones might start rattling and coming together. So y'all stay hooked up, because I see, and somebody's scared. People wouldn't be spending this much time. People wouldn't be running a divisive campaign if your unity wasn't powerful. So somebody doesn't want the bones to get together. So we don't know. I would tell you today, we ain't gonna answer all your questions, because we're not gonna answer all the questions about every 1, 2, 3. I don't know. We're gonna do some stuff at Highlander. We're taking some people out. But what I think we may answer, and the goal of each presenter is from their perspective to share with us today and the nation why dealing with this issue as it relates to the poor is, and black people and the poor of all different, why it standing down is not an option. That's the purpose of this teaching today. When you come away from here, you may not have all the answers. You may have more frustrations about how we're going to get all these people. You might say, well, how are we going to get black folk? Okay, but the question is, after you get through all that, you leave here today saying, but we have to. Because if you got a have to in your spirit, if you got a have to, grandma used to tell me, boy, you got to have a have to. See, I'm old country preacher. She said, Grandma, Grandma said, you got to have a have to. I said, well, Grandma, how you going to do it? She said, you got to have a have to. I said, what, Grandma? She said, but I don't know how. She said, but do you know who? You got to decide whose side you're going to be on. And then the hows will begin to work themselves. So the goal today over this 2-hour teaching is for the nation, for people to hear why we have to. Why we must begin a movement of resistance now. And yes, Trump is in the White House, but the have to is deeper than Trump. The have to is whoever got elected. Now, not saying that we didn't have our preferences and all that, but let's just go to 2017. There would still be millions of poor people. Right. The audit would still need to be done. Dr. Forbes, I'm going to say this. Dr. Forbes been talking about this audit long before this election. I heard him preach a sermon on 5, 6 years ago. It's been in his spirit. Maybe God was showing him what was coming, but it doesn't matter. The reality is we have to. We cannot have another commemoration, like a commemoration of the march across the Edmonds Pettus Bridge while people are taking away voting rights. We need no more commemorations. We need movements, consecration, and we need to remember that if you are going to remember what people did in the past, the best form of flattery is imitation. That's my opening remarks. I should have done 10 minutes ago or 20 minutes ago. Forward together. Say not one step back. Say standing down is not an option. Now hook up one more time. Hook up with a person. Say, you're not getting rid of me. This is, we have to. Tell them, say, we have to. 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 We have to do this.
Everybody's got a right to live. Everybody's got a right to live. And before this campaign fails, we'll all go down in jail, because everybody's got a right to live.